Good morning. Good to see everyone here. Good to see the fleets here visiting with us. I've got to apologize. I made some slides, tried to get them to transfer over. Didn't happen. It's my fault, not Fred's. So we'll have to kind of go as old school on this. Turn with me, if you would, please, to Mark chapter 6, and then take your little thing and mark Luke chapter 7. I want to encourage everyone to make sure they come back tonight at 6 o'clock. Reed will be preaching. We got together on Wednesday night to make sure that we weren't preaching the same thing, so you'd hear the same lesson twice. Or as I like to think, make sure he wasn't copying me. And so it's something different. I got a little sneak peek, and it's very interesting. So definitely encourage you to come back. Mark chapter 6. Have you ever been amazed? Have anyone ever come to you and they've done something or said something and you were just utterly astonished? It's just like, how could they say this? Either positively or negatively. Maybe they've done something to surprise you. So we're going to look at a couple of cases, one negative, one positive, where people surprised Jesus. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about the fact that Jesus was amazed. So let's look over at Mark chapter 6. We'll deal with this first. And it starts off, chapter 6, verse 1. Jesus went from there and came into his hometown, and his disciples followed him. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and the many listeners were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what is his wisdom given? And what is this wisdom given to him, and such miracles as though these performed by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and among his own relatives and in his own household." And he could do no miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he wondered at their unbelief. So here we go. Jesus had been out and about in Galilee preaching and teaching. He comes home, as he's wont to do, and he's in his hometown. And then Sabbath comes, and it's as his custom, he goes in there and he teaches. But what do we see is the reaction of the people that hear him? Right? How is he teaching this? Where is he learning? How is he doing these things? How is he performing these miracles? They're questioning him. And if you read it, you can just feel the contempt coming through on the words themselves. Right? He says, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary?" And notice who doesn't get mentioned here? Joseph, right? So there's a phrase called ad hominem, where if you're arguing with something, you address the person and not the argument themselves. And so the same thing here. What do they attack? They attack his profession, right? You can see maybe they're like, how can this blue collar type person here have these words of wisdom and sharing them with us? Where did he learn these things? He's simply a carpenter. He's just a carpenter. He makes things with his hands. He doesn't use his brain. All right, and then to say the son of Mary. So again, going back to his the circumstances of his birth, right? So instead of addressing the argument of what he is saying himself, what do? They attack him. They attack his social standing. They attack the circumstances of his birth. They do not address what he actually teaches, does he? They say nothing about that. And so they spend all of this time questioning him and attacking him. And when you think about this, these are the very people that grew up with Jesus, did they not? They lived with him. They interacted with him from the time of his youth all the way up. They would have seen him. They would have dealt with him. They would have known, is this a good person? Is this a bad person? They would have heard, okay, this is what he's saying. And yet, for some reason, they looked down on him. They rejected what he had to say. And to the point that, how's his response back? He says, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his own relatives and his own household." We have an expression, right? Familiarity breeds contempt. And so maybe the same thing here. Because they were so used to him, because they were around him, they just rejected him. Who is he to tell us what to do? Who is he to say what to say? And then as a result, verse 5, this is interesting. He says he could do no miracle there except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And so verse 5, again, we see here the purpose of the miracle. The purpose of the miracle is not to wow people or wonder them. If you remember in 1 Corinthians, Paul is saying the Jews, they just want a miracle a minute, right? Just give me a miracle, miracle, miracle. The miracle was simply to confirm what he was teaching. And so because they didn't believe what he was teaching, he's like, I'm going to hold off. I'm not going to perform these miracles. So it wasn't a case of him not being able to physically able to do these miracles, but this is just him saying, because of their unbelief, I'm not going to do this. I've done a few. Obviously, they even made mention of it, but even that themselves still did not convince them. And then verse 6, and he wondered at their unbelief. And this one, and we'll go into it at the end after the second group of scriptures here. This one really caused me pause. But here he is just amazed and marveled at the fact that they would not believe him, that they would not listen to him, that they rejected him. Now let's turn over to Luke chapter 7. And we have a counterexample here. I'll read through first 10 verses. When he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And a centurion's slave, who was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurions sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And I say to another one, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, "I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. So here we have a contrast. And this is the only other time that we have here Jesus talking about Jesus being amazed or marveled. So he's in Capernaum. He's on his way. And there's the centurion in verse 2. When we think about the centurion, he is the occupier. He is a high official in the occupying army. He's a Roman, comes from a pagan background, right? He's the guy that's in charge. You would think that he would be arrogant, right, and look down on the Jews and whatnot. But what we find here is a different person entirely. He has a slave who's sick and about to die. Now, the Romans, they looked down on slaves. They said, they considered them, there was an expression, they're a tool with a voice. Like a slave was just a tool to use. And if they die, well, that's okay. You just get another slave. There's plenty more. But this centurion, he's different. He cares about this person. He sees that they're sick and they're about to die, and he wants to do something about it. So he hears about Jesus. And what does he do? First thing is he asks these Jewish elders to come and say something. And when you think about just that act itself, to the occupier, the person in control, asking people who are below him, who he is ruling over, to come and do this favor to him, and that in itself is an act of humility. And he goes and he asks Jewish elders to go to talk to Jesus, to come and say them. And when he does, so they come, and it speaks to their character and to the centurion's character. When they come, they earnestly implored him. This wasn't just a simple ask. They were saying, "Can you please take care of this slave? You'll be doing us a favor. You're doing him a favor." They're earnestly imploring, deeply imploring. So you can see the care that these Jewish elders have for the centurion. Obviously, he is someone that's important to them in their lives. And he says, "For he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." And so we see a little bit more about the centurion, this person who comes from another country, this person from a pagan background, that he cares about them enough, that he loves the Jewish people enough that he went and funded the building of their synagogue, of their place of worship. And this isn't just simply, to use an expression from the Vietnam War, hearts and minds, right? I'm just doing this just to make the Jewish people happy and not revolt. But this was something that was done out of love, out of concern. And perhaps he is what is described as one of the God followers. There's these Gentiles who would come to the synagogue, they would worship, they wouldn't convert fully, or God-fearers, I should say. They wouldn't convert fully. Maybe he's one of them, whatnot. But obviously, this is someone who loves the Jewish people. He cares about them, and he acts upon it. So these elders are coming, and they're saying, please do this for us, because he loves us. So what does Jesus do? Jesus starts along, and then the centurion, and again, this shows the care that he has for the slave. What does he do? He sends friends. So he sends his closest friends, go ask some more, just in case, right? Maybe he needs more pleading. I don't know. And it shows, again, that love that he has for his slave, that he's willing to ask people to help him out, to beg more. Again, not demanding that Jesus come, not saying, come over here and save my slave, but imploring, begging him to come. And we see the humility. And what does the friend say? The friend say to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself. They give this message, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. So I don't know if this is because he personally feels unworthy of this sense of personal holiness, or because maybe he realizes that if Jesus were to come into the household of a Gentile, it would make life rough for Jesus, or whatever the case. But again, he's not demanding, he's asking, he's like, just please do this. You don't need to come into my house. I know you can do this. And even then he says, you just say it. You just speak this into existence. You save the slave, and it will happen. If you go through and you read through the Gospels and you read how the miracles are done, there's a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes Jesus places hands on them. He makes mud, right, with spit. There's one unusual case where he kind of puts his fingers in his ears and his mouth, and he does all these different things as part of it. It's an interesting to think about the why. But here the centurion just says, you know what? All you have to do is just say it, and it will happen. You don't even need to be close. There's no kind of spiritual blast radius where you have to be within the house or within a certain place to do it. You just say it, and it will happen. And he says, I know this because you're in control. I'm in control. I say go do this, someone does it. I say come here, they come here. And so he says, I know, I have faith, I believe that it's going to happen. Verse 9. So when Jesus hears this is where he's marveled. This is where he is amazed, because here is someone that should not be showing faith, that should not be showing belief, because they're from the background that they're coming. There's someone that's high up in authority, that's used to giving orders. There's someone that's maybe not used to showing humility or showing subservience. And what are they doing? They're doing exactly that. So they marveled at him. And what does he do? He turns and says, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. He's saying, even among all the Jews, all the people who should be believing, nobody here has the faith, has the trust that this centurion does. There's a parallel passage in Matthew, I think Matthew chapter 8, where most of what we read is kind of, it's shortened, it's abbreviated, but where he expounds on this even further. And he says, look, there's going to be people coming from the west and the east, and they're going to respond. They're going to be at the table. And there's people who were supposed to be at the table who did not, because they did not have faith. They did not trust. They did not believe. And so here we have Jesus himself marveling, wondering, like, wow, how could this person demonstrate this faith? And sure enough, when the people that had been sent out, when they came back, what happened? That slave had been found in good health. So we have here two examples of faith, a good example and a bad example. And I want to spend a few minutes just thinking about the fact that Jesus marveled. One of the reasons why I picked this and picked these passages is because, again, these are the only times that we see Jesus marveling. And it's something I've had to wonder about, like, why would Jesus do that? Here's Jesus. He can perform all these miracles. He knows people's thoughts. Why this in particular? And why be amazed? We look over in Hebrews chapter 11. What do we learn about faith? The writer of Hebrew writes this, chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For us to respond in faith, we can't see it. We just have to trust that it will happen. In the subsequent chapter, verse 4, we're told that Jesus is, or I'm sorry, verse 2, that Jesus is the example for us of faith, that we can see his life and how he lived. And we say, okay, I need to base my life on that, and I need to live that. So for Jesus to be able to demonstrate to us what living a life of faith looks like, he had to have that ability, I believe, where he was surprised, where he didn't know what was happening. I think about my own life. I think about times where, just waiting for that other shoe to drop, where you're just waiting for something bad to happen while you're going about, and you're like, okay, things are going okay now, but who knows what's around that corner. And there's times that I've wished, I wish I could just see what's happening. If I wish I could just know what's going on. So even if that bad thing still happens, I'm prepared for it. But if we have that, if we can see, how can we have faith? How can we trust that God can be there for us, that God can help us? My lack of sight, of knowing what's coming ahead, should help me develop that sense of faith, that sense of, I will trust in God. I will, whatever happens, I know that ultimately he is in control, and that I will just trust in him, and whatever happens, happens. And I think even in those times where I think I'm in control, probably not as much in control as Jesus is in control, as God is in control. That he is he's truly the one that's in power. That he is truly the one that can solve my problems, can protect me, can do all the things and see me through, and he's definitely wiser and more powerful. So where does this leave us? And I think let's go back to the second point. We have these two examples here of faith or the lack thereof. And what I'd like you to consider is maybe do a thought exercise sometime over this week. And think back, if Jesus was here now, the same conditions, or I was back then, would he marvel at my faith? Would he be amazed at my faith? Would he look at me and say, wow, that he's demonstrating a lot of faith. He's doing really well, right? He's totally trusting that God will take care of him. Or would he be amazed at my lack of faith and saying, wow, despite being raised with Christian parents and Christian home and having all these examples, and despite time after time, prayer being answered and me showing again and again that I can take care of him, that I can trust him, he still has that lack of faith. Would he marvel at that? And so what each of us should do is take that time and look and say, what does my faith look like? Right? And it's always in a spectrum where our faith is never always one or the other, but just in general. Am I more like the centurion, or am I more like the people that Jesus grew up with and showed that lack of faith? And if I'm more like the centurion, if you're more like the centurion, I say, it's great, keep at it, continue to grow. If I'm more, which I suspect like myself at times, more like the people that Jesus grew up with and just showed that lack of faith, well, I need to use the tools that have been given to me, going to God in prayer, reading his scriptures, using the church family to help encourage me so that I can learn to lean on and trust in God. So I leave you with this lesson. I ask you to consider those things and take stock of our own faith. if we are lacking in faith, I think that's the beauty of being in the church is that we have others there to help us out, that we're not going on this solo, that we're not by ourselves, that we have others to encourage us, to help us, and to guide us. If you're in need of that help, if you're in need of those prayers, if you're in need of those guidance, we ask you to make that known as together we stand, as we sing.